gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Hawai'i Commercial Kitchens Technical Assistance Workshops. Today we are joined by Daeus Bencomo of Lavaloha Chocolate Farm. So this program is from the U.S. Department of the Treasury State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds Program, authorized by the American Rescue Plan Act. And the County of Hawaii is a recipient of that program through RFP 4573, the Food Security and Agricultural Initiatives Program. And this program also includes these workshops along with one-on-one coaching and technical assistance for any food-related business on the island in Hawaii County that's been in operation since March of 2020, so COVID, right? The Commercial Kitchens cohort, if you're not familiar already, we have Kohala Food Hub in Hawaii, along with Touching the Earth Farm in Hawaii, and then Hawaii Ulu Cooperative here in Hilo, Wiko Lehua, which is in Hilo but will be creating a commercial kitchen in Mountain View, and then Hawaiian Acres Community Association will be building the Moho Kitchen. Onamea Farm Hub is also building kitchen space in Onamea. And then the West Hawaii Community Kitchen in Kona is near completion, should be opening later this year. And then we were also joined by Hamakua Coast Premium in Pauilo. They took over the old Pauilo Community Kitchen. So that's where they're manufacturing their syrups and renting out additional kitchen space. All of these kitchens and some additional kitchens for rent you can find on HawaiiCommercialKitchens.com, along with registrations for these workshops and recordings from past workshops. So, like I said, in addition to these workshops, we're doing one-on-one technical assistance. That includes business coaching, that includes financial planning with Dr. Brett Carey, HACCP plans. If you need a HACCP plan, we can provide funding for that. John Nakashima, Food Safety Services Hawaii. Daeus Bencomo here for personnel management, marketing, permitting and compliance, and commercial kitchen training also are all available. And that brings us to our special guest, Daeus Bencomo. Daeus, again, thank you so much for joining us. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Daeus Bencomo. I'm the CEO of Mahilani Partners. We do business as Lavaloha Chocolate Farm and Hilo Coffee Company. Lavaloha Chocolate Farm is just basically what it sounds like, a big chocolate farm. We do operate Hilo Coffee Company. It's brand new. Been around since August of 2024. It's been fun. We won our first coffee award last year, too. I was a veteran, or am a veteran, still around. I was in the Army for 10 years, and I'm originally from New Mexico. I was born in a small rural agricultural town, and have been in ag pretty much my entire life. Some of the things that we're going to be covering today are W-2 employees versus 1099 employees and how that works in Hawaii, the H-2A labor program in Hawaii, good interviewing practices, onboarding and paperwork, employment performance reviews, counseling and reprimands, and team recognition and team building / bonding. So we're going to jump right into the W-2 versus a 1099 contractor form. W-2s employees are generally, you hire them, you withhold taxes, they fill out a HW4 form and a W-4 form. They're eligible for benefits if you offer benefits, so PTO, paid holidays, overtime, health insurance, all those good things. A 401k option. And the employer or the owner controls how the work is performed, so they assign the tasks on a daily basis or weekly or monthly or yearly basis, essentially. And then contractors, they're independent workers. They manage their own taxes. You don't give them a W-4 form or an HW-4 form or an I-9 form. They just have a 1099 that you have them fill out on their own. They don't get any benefits, so if you're providing benefits to your contractors, you can come up into liability issues with the IRS and back tax reimbursements to the IRS. I love it. And they basically control their work methods, and it's really just like singular project based. I always liken it towards like if you're building a home and you don't know what you're doing and you're not a carpenter, you hire a contractor, a general contractor, and that's basically what you do for your business. If you don't know what you're doing, you bring in outside help, and that's your contractor for any amount of time, as long as it's specified in the contract. All right. So some of the legal implications for misclassification of a W-2 employee versus a 1099 contractor. If you utilize a 1099 contractor as a W-2 employee, you're going to have to pay back taxes, and the contractor will have to pay back taxes, including interest and any fines that the IRS decides to give you. Usually the Department of Labor will require back wages, overtime, and damages if you're utilizing a 1099 contractor as a W-2 employee. And there's no end in sight on how much you can pay that employee essentially. So if you have them for 2 years listed as a contractor, you're gonna have to pay them the equivalency of all their overtime wages along with their hourly or salary wage.
Okay, so Daeus, is this a common situation? Like, do a lot of people try to sneak 1099 contractors when they should be hiring employees?
It is definitely, and I'm guilty of it. When I first started working and managing Lavaloha, I didn't know the difference, and I was putting a lot of folks on 1099 contracts, and when it came time to do our taxes, I learned it the hard way. Definitely for folks starting out, I think just doing a little bit of extra research on 1099 contractors, they can be useful, but if you're in an agricultural establishment or in a kitchen establishment, there are liabilities that the employer holds, and you don't necessarily want to put a 1099 contractor in a liable position because they're not generally insured if you're first starting out. Whereas if you have a W-2 employee, they fall under your umbrella of insurance for general liability, and you shouldn't have to worry about any of that unless they get hurt. And then that goes into workers' comp, which we'll go over in a little bit. State agencies can levy additional fines or criminal charges and lawsuits. If you misclassify your employer or employee as a 1099 contractor and that employee finds out, they can sue you for your company essentially, for lost wages, benefits, and legal fees. And it's just not a fun day. I haven't gone through that yet, thankfully. I learned my lesson the first time and haven't repeated it. There are some guidelines on classification. This is just a blip of it. There's a lot of guidelines, but these are some of the top three all-encompassing. So behavior control, are you directing how and when the work is done? Are you telling them when to show up to work, how long to work, and what the work is? Or are you just telling them, this is the project, I need you to do it, and here's your paycheck? Financial control, are you controlling their payments, expenses, and tools? Is the contractor buying supplies for the job or the gig or the project? Are you going to reimburse the contractor? Generally, if you have a W-2 employee and they're buying tools, they're either going to buy it with your P card or get reimbursed or petty cash. They shouldn't be buying tools for their job if they're a W-2 employee. You should provide those tools for them. And then the type of relationship, is it an ongoing work or is it just a singular project? And if benefits are offered. If benefits are offered, then you have to pull them off as a 1099 contractor.
I know starting out, hiring employees is a big deal. So it's very likely if you're a small business and you haven't hired any employees yet, the first people you're gonna bring on are likely going to be contractors before you take the next step into the whole W-2 employee zone.
Yeah.
And as Daeus will elaborate on, there's a lot of things that come along with W-2 employees. And that's where the whole human resources industry comes into play.
So H-2A labor program in Hawaii, that is it's a mix between contract work and bringing in day laborers from other countries, generally from like South America, Philippines, China, Vietnam. And it's generally for agricultural laborers, sometimes general construction and contractors. But basically, for an example, a neighbor of mine utilizes H-2A employees for coffee harvesting. You have to pay them a livable wage, which is minimum wage. You have to provide free housing, and you have to provide a place for them to cook and transportation to and from the establishment that they'll be working. It's a lot of bureaucracy behind it. It is definitely a good program if you're able to provide housing and food and transportation for them. For us, it's not feasible right now. We don't have housing on the property that's free. So we generally do seasonal hires of W-2 employees rather than utilizing the H-2A program. Hawaii does have specific processing that the local Department of Labor and the IRC, Industrial Relations, will need some type of paperwork from you, and I can't remember the forms off the top of my head. But essentially, as long as you have a permitted house, a place to cook, a place to sleep, and transportation, you can have H-2A workers. If you guys have any questions, feel free to get with Anthony or I via email, and I can forward over any documents that I have. I just don't remember it off the top of my head. Going into interviewing, so this is more so for W-2 employees. You can utilize this or a similar structure of the best practices for 1099 contractors if you'd like. Generally what I do is I have a structured list of questions of 20 to 30 questions, pretty generalized, not necessarily job-based, and then an additional list of 10 to 15 questions that are job and task-oriented. You really want to ask discriminatory questions. You can't ask really what your ethnicity is or if you're disabled. If they're ADA, you do have to provide compliance modules for them. So if they're in a wheelchair, you have to have ramps, you have to have reliable parking, improved surfaces, things like that. And you want to use consistent evaluation criteria. We utilize a rubric of a scoring rubric where each section has a score of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, and each job description bullet point is on that rubric. So when I ask them a job description related question, I'll grade them on that rubric on how well they answered that question or if they didn't answer it at all. And I can go back after I get my interviews done, refer to the rubric, look at their resume, cross-reference everything, and make my selection from there. Another consideration is you don't want to ask age, marital status, religion. You want to keep politics and really like sexuality and gender out of the question. It keeps everything fair and on an open playing field, blank slate. We don't, it's illegal for us as an employer to ask that, honestly. But some of the other tips that I utilize, I include a mix of behavioral and technical questions. So one of the questions I like to ask is if they're a customer service facing department, if they've ever had to deal with an unruly guest and how the interaction went from their point of view. And if it's with a past employer that they have listed as a reference, I'll follow up with that reference and ask them the same question about the same situation, make sure everything stays aligned. If it's like a hospitality or sales job, I'll generally ask them to do a small math problem without a piece of paper. Like somebody's purchasing 4 bars of chocolate, it costs $41.82, they pay with 50, what's your change? Or what would be their change? And if they're unable to do it, then that pretty much tells me that they're not suited for the sales position or that specific position. I also really like to do pre-interviews and phone interviews. It really weeds out a lot of the folks that aren't dedicated or just in it for the unemployment aspect. It is really hard to find good quality candidates these days because of the unemployment laws. They're pretty lax now. So as long as they're looking for jobs and securing interviews, they can continuously reapply for unemployment. So that's been a problem the past 3 years for me, especially since COVID. I've found that phone interviews and pre-interviews help tremendously with weeding those folks out, definitely. All right.
That's a good hot tip, Daeus. I didn't think about that one. And it makes a lot of sense given that, you know, if you're listening to this workshop, you're likely a small business owner or operator. And, right, the small business owner has to wear a dozen different hats, and HR is one of them as employees start coming into the picture. So the interview process can take a lot of time, you know, evaluating all the different candidates. So doing weeding out with the pre-interview, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. I utilize Indeed. It's really easy, really simple. It's cheap, and there's a free, I mean, you don't have to pay for a job sponsorship, but there are pre-interview questions that you can line up and make your own forms of their templates or create just a brand new question on the pre-interview process. And if they don't answer them, I just don't look at their resume. I also look at formatting of their resumes. I really like to know, the Army instilled that into me, if their margins are off or if they're missing a comma or anything like that. I'm pretty stringent on that type of thing. Unless they're just straight out of high school. For an entry-level position, I'm not as stringent. Some of the interview questions that I've proposed and that Anthony and I have talked about: what would you say your greatest strength is and your biggest weakness? There's a couple of different variations on that. What is the biggest professional accomplishment that you've had in the past 5 years? What's the lowest? What is something a goal that you strive to hit but you ended up missing in the past 5 years? So there's different ways to word it and still get the same answer. That's probably one of my favorite questions to ask.
Yeah, so we're gonna do a little audience participation for this part. So I'm gonna need the people on the Zoom and folks here in the audience. Let's start with, what are some other examples of interview questions, either examples of good interview questions or bad interview questions that you've personally experienced? Strength: I am a hard worker that takes pride in my work and doing things efficiently. Weakness: sometimes the time frame of my goals may be overly ambitious. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. I am aware of this tendency and have begun correcting for it by providing myself more reasonable time frames to accomplish various goals. That's good because you say the weakness and what you're doing about it.
I would hire you, Brittany.
Brittany, Daeus says you're hired.
One other thing I wanted to mention, just to go back on resumes a little bit more. I know a lot of my employees get a lot of certifications through our company. We host, in fact, we have one of our consultants here today, Stafford. We host a lot of different professional development trainings, like management and leadership trainings. We pay for CPR, first aid, and basic life-saving certifications. I get them forklift certified, OSHA 10, OSHA 20 certified. So on your resumes, if you have all these certifications, list your top 5, maybe 10 at the very bottom. Don't list every single one of them, because I'm not going to read every single one of them. And 9 times out of 10, the interviewer or the hiring manager or the owner isn't going to read all of them. List the ones that you think work best with the position you're applying for. And as an employer, I mean, I really, like Anthony mentioned, I really don't look at resumes that's anything longer than 2 pages. So it's short, curt, and, you know, bottom line up front, right up there at the top of the resume with your overview and summary, work experience for the past 5 years, certifications at the bottom. That's the structure that I look for when I'm hiring.
And then you'll have more time to talk about yourself and your accomplishments in the interview, right?
Yep, that's the point of the interview, definitely. All right. So onboarding paperwork, you don't necessarily need an HR company or an HR representative to do this for you. It is a lot of paperwork though. It is pretty bureaucratic, and you have to do your due diligence and detail oriented when you're doing this yourself. So some of the required documents to onboard somebody outside of having a GE tax license and a federal employee identification number for yourself as an employer, but the required documents you need for your employee, a W-2 employee, is a federal W-4, the tax withholding form, an HW-4, which is the Hawaii state version of the tax withholding statement, an I-9, which is employment eligibility verification that tells you and the state and the federal government if they're on a visa, a student visa, a worker's visa, if they're allowed to be in the country, and if they are, what type of visa and how long they're allowed to work. Whether they're an immigrant or not, you do have to have that I-9 completed, and generally you'll need a passport or a birth certificate with a social security card to verify the I-9 form. And then a direct deposit form. It doesn't necessarily have to be a form. It depends on your bank and who you're going through as the employer. For us, I need a voided check and a direct deposit form, and it's just a repetition of the voided check. I don't know why it's like that. But really, generally, it's just a voided check, and you can input the stuff with the information with your bank or your payroll solution website or your HR company, and they can get the direct deposit set up for you. And then an employee handbook acknowledgement. This is a state requirement, and I think it's also a federal requirement. You do have to have a handbook, but in the state of Hawaii, you can have memorandums aggregated into a handbook, so you can come up with new policies as you're operating. So you can have one piece of paper saying, don't hurt yourself, don't hurt anybody else, no smoking at this time or around this area, no drugs, and just whatever you want as your rule base for your employees. That singular piece of paper can be considered your handbook, and then you have to have another piece of paper that says, I print your name, the applicant will print their name and sign it at the bottom saying that they acknowledged reading through your handbook. You always have to give them, at that point in time, with the rest of the tax documents, an acknowledgement handbook form, and if you have a handbook, send it to them or give it to them right then and there as well. Some other considerations. To be quite honest, I've been utilizing a HR company for the past 5 years, and it's been fantastic. It's a little pricey, but it definitely takes a lot off my plate. They control and monitor and take care of all these things for me now. From the W-4 to the TDI claims, everything's handled for me. So Hawaii Prepared Healthcare Act compliance, got to do a lot of research on it. Basically, if you have an employee that's working consecutively for 3 weeks or more at 20 hours or more with, I think, 1.5% of their wages being garnished for medical benefits, you have to supply 50% of the rest of the medical benefits payments for them. So if you essentially have only part-time workers, you don't have to worry about the Hawaii Prepared Healthcare Act and complying with it. If you have full-time workers, you have to worry about the compliance.
You said 20 hours, so 20
hours consecutively for 3 weeks.
20 hours consecutively for 3 weeks. You can still consider 20 hours part-time.
Part-time. That
right?
fourth week, once that fourth week hits and they're still hitting 20 hours, then that's when it changes to a full-time.
Yeah, okay. Got it.
And then workers' comp. This is federal and statewide. It's very confusing for me till this day. I'm very thankful to have our HR company help me with it. If somebody gets hurt on the job, you have to have general liability insurance no matter what. Whether you're just a GE tax license with no employees, you still have to have some form of insurance because it is an entity and it's an extra layer of protection between you and that entity. If somebody gets hurt, that's when your general liability starts covering it, and the state workers' comp program will balance out whatever money that you have to pay out of pocket. And that gets paid through your payroll. So you pay the state a workers' compensation insurance premium every month per employee. If they get hurt and they can't work, that workers' compensation that you paid in insurance and through the state payroll balances out, and the worker that's hurt gets paid. I know that was hard to explain, but I hope you guys get it. And then TDI, temporary disability insurance. This isn't necessarily if they get hurt on the job. It can be any ADA compliant employee that needs to utilize TDI. It's just a supplemental pay program for them so they don't lose their job. It's essentially a leave of absence while getting paid 2/3 of their weekly paycheck for up to, I want to say 12 weeks, but I think it changed recently. And that's also a lot of research, and it's been a very long time since I had to do anything with it. I recommend just going through an open, or not open source, but if there's freeware like QuickBooks, paid software like paycheck.com or payrecords.com, I just recommend going through one of them because they'll be able to help you get a lot of this off your plate. And once you're hiring, you're already going to be at that point where you don't want to deal with HR anymore. Here's an example, or actually this is the W-4 form, the federalized tax withholding form. It doesn't need a lot of information. You just have to read a lot of dry documentation in words. It's pretty basic. You're basically going to fill out your first, last name, social security number, physical and mailing address, if you're single or married, if you file jointly with somebody, or if you're the head of household, meaning you're the only one that's making money for the family or for the household. And then you're going to go to your exemptions, or if you work multiple jobs, you'll need to fill out that entire section, or the employee will have to fill out that entire section. And if the employee fills this out wrong, you definitely should do the due diligence of checking it, making sure it's right, and fixing it if there's any, or amending it if there's any problems. Because once it's sent to the feds, the IRS isn't going to have any way to know if everything's accurate until April of the following year, and the employee would be held liable to any tax credits or missed tax payments or misinformation on the W-4 form, and they can blame you for it, and it gets into a sticky situation. But you're the first line of defense for that. I always highly recommend going over the W-4 and HW-4 form with them as they're there so they fill it out properly, especially on the exemptions portion. Yeah, this is just the instructions. Like I said, it's a lot of dry rules and reading. This is the state version of the last form, the HW-4. A lot of the same stuff, except there's a portion of it for the employer to fill out. Employer's name, so that's usually the entity name, unless you're a sole proprietorship, which would be your name. The address that the physical work or the brick and mortar or wherever the entity is based out of, that's going to be that address. And then you're going to need your GE tax license number on box 2 in the lower half, or the lower right half of the form. You should already have a GE tax license if you're selling products to consumers though. And the I-9 form, this is what I mentioned earlier to ensure that the potential new hire is a citizen or an immigrant that's allowed to work in the US through visas. It requires pretty much all their information, so the federal government can look into it, make sure they're actually supposed to be here. They do need to provide documents to scan and be sent into the federal government. The easiest is just to ask for a passport, put it right in the scanner, send it away. If they don't have a passport, you can get away with utilizing a state ID with a birth certificate and a social security card, or just a social security card with a birth certificate, or a school ID, a military ID, along with a birth certificate or social security card. It needs to have some form of real identification though. So this is for contractors. If you're going to do any business actually with other, like if you're going to be paying a business or you're going to be paying an individual that's not a W-2 employee, a W-9 has to be filled out by that person or that entity. Like for example, Let me think of a good example. When I made my mistake, I hired a bunch of 1099 employees. The first year I took over, gave them all W-9s to fill out. They didn't know how to do it. I just sent it in. Everything seemed fine. Came to realize none of them were actually allowed to be contractors because they didn't have a GE tax license. And I also gave them the wrong 1099 form. If they're an individual performing work for you, it's a completely different 1099. There's 1099 miscellaneous, 1099E, and I gave them a 1099 miscellaneous. So the W-9 helps prevent my issues. It also helps with keeping their tax records on file, and you have all their business information. So if they don't pay you or you don't pay them, all the information is right there. Just keep it on file and make sure you always have access to it. I know Anthony has a pretty cool story to share.
Yeah. I also, ran into this specific issue while facilitating this program, right? So as part of the Hawai'i Commercial Kitchens program, I'm hiring contractors to perform additional services. And like Daeus said, as long as you're paying anyone to do anything, as long as it's actually, I think it's $600 per year. Yeah. If it's $600 or over, you have to have a W-9 on file, and then you have to issue them a 1099 at the end of the tax year.
Actually, one thing to speak on that a little bit more, the $600 is a fiscal year amount. So you can pay somebody up to $600 under the table, essentially, with no tax implications. Once you hit that $600 mark, you have to have them fill out the W-9 and give them a 1099, but it resets at the end of the fiscal year going into the new fiscal year. So just a side note.
So let's say somebody here in the audience, raise your hand if you have an LLC. Okay, great. Let's say I'm gonna go April. Let's say I'm gonna be hiring you for some contracting work, and I need you to fill out this W-9. What do you do for box 3A? Check the appropriate box for federal tax classification of the entity individual whose name is entered on line 1. Check only one of the following 7 boxes. Are you an individual sole proprietor, C Corp, S Corp, partnership, trust, estate, or LLC? And if you select LLC, you have to enter the tax classification. C for corporation, S for S Corp, P for partnership. Or other. LLC, and what's your tax classification? Are you a C Corp, an S Corp, or a partnership?
S Corp.
S Corp, you believe. Could you be taxed as a sole proprietor?
So you would actually fall under.
So if you are taxed as a sole proprietor, you're not a C Corp or an S Corp in terms of tax classification. Read this note here. Check the LLC box above and enter the appropriate code. Unless it is a disregarded entity should instead check the appropriate box for the tax classification of its owner. So if you are a single member LLC and you are being taxed as a sole proprietor, and I'm hiring you as a contractor and you have to fill out this W-9, even though you have an LLC, you're checking the individual sole proprietor box because you're a disregarded entity. Just a friendly reminder that LLC is not a tax classification. It's a business structure enforced at the state level, whereas all of these forms are dealing with federal tax classification.
I really like this as a tool in the toolbox. I generally do annual performance reviews, or if they're with leadership, I'll try and do them every quarter. But for entry level, I'll try my best to be in at least the annual review with every single employee and their supervisor. The main purpose of it is to evaluate their effectiveness. It's going to sound kind of bad the way I'm going to say it, but are they still working and making money for you? Are they able to support themselves? Are they making enough money to cover their own costs, essentially? It also helps you to identify any growth opportunities within your organization for the employee. If you think, I harp on employee retention greatly, and I do a lot of internal management promotions up to a certain threshold. So this helps me identify any of the employees that have the capacity and the bandwidth to be able to move into leadership roles. And it's an opportunity to give them a raise or a promotion, even bonuses like a spot bonus or anything like that. And it also helps identify kind of what their weaknesses are that you've noticed as a leader or the owner that they can improve on. That's really easy. Some can be a little bit harder, but generally it's a really, really good tool to keep around. Frequency, like I said, I generally try and get in with every employee at least once a year. With upper management, I do try to get at least 4 of them in, and not every single review throughout the year for my upper management constitutes a raise. It's more of a check-in, just a little bit more of a formal check-in, so I have a paper trail on their KPIs that they're hitting, the goals and metrics that I've set out and laid out for them, if they're actually obtaining them. Some of the components, you can have a self-assessment in tandem with your assessment of the employee, so it seems a little more fair, not just like, hey, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong. This is okay, but it can be improved, and this is okay, it can be improved. Makes them feel like they have a little bit more of self-worth and they're actually wanted around you. I've noticed it's helped a lot with self-confidence too in the employees. They know when they're lacking and they know that I see it. And having them put themselves on blast like that is pretty great. It's funny and it's also useful, I should say. Manager evaluations are a little bit more in depth. You definitely want to make sure you have all bullet points of their job description in line with the rubric that you're basing it off of, as well as the KPIs that you set with them each quarter, each month, or each year, and where they are strategically along that line. And any other like side objectives or goals that you've set for them that don't necessarily mesh with their day-to-day work, but could be like a tangential project, I definitely make sure to get all of that in for a manager or supervisory review. And definitely you always want to maintain goal setting. Whether they're already done with all their goals, that just means you can pile more onto them and they'll be happy. Or if they're still kind of lacking and they don't hit all their goals on time, you definitely want to keep that turnover rate of goal setting and goal getting high. You really want to instill goals, proper goals, and good standing requirements with your employees during the performance reviews. Standardizing your forms, I built a template. It's basically left column is job description, middle column is a 1 through 5 grading rubric, 1 being low, 5 being high, and then the far right is notes, appraisals, comments, just kind of anything about their activity and their work life. And then at the end of it, I always provide a discussion of feedback without the paperwork. So it's a little more informal at the very end so they can get whatever they need off their chests, because it is valuable when, just listen to your employees when they vent, and this is a good time to do that because you think you see everything, but you're not doing the same job over and over just like your employees are, and I think this is a really good time to really lay out everything and all their experiences that they may have and feedback they may have for you as well. Employee counseling. So this is a little bit different than reviews. This is more for on-the-spot addressing performance or behavior issues constructively. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. Generally, you want to start with a verbal warning and document it for yourself. Make sure you document it. You don't need the employee to sign it, but if Anthony over here was giving flack to his supervisor, like, I'm not going to do it, you do it. And I over here, I'm going to give him an on-the-spot verbal warning right then and there with his supervisor. And after the fact, I'll take note of it, have the supervisor sign it in tandem with me, and then file it away, keep it in their file. If the problem persists, it turns into a written warning or a written counseling, and you lay out the time, the date, the person, and who it affected all out in that paper, and discuss with them, like, this is what I saw, this is what I've heard, this is what you're doing. You can give me your side of the story, but no, this is a break in policy, and this is your written warning. I need you to sign the bottom. They don't have to sign the bottom still, but as long as you maintain the documentation from verbal all the way to termination, you'll be protected as an employer. Final warnings generally can be written or verbal. I always write them though, just because documentation is key, especially if you have to terminate due to a policy break. I give 3 chances, 3 essential strikes, essentially, through written warnings. Verbal warnings, if the problem doesn't persist and doesn't turn into a written warning, I'll just let it go, don't count it out against them, move on, and have a good day. But if there is a final warning that warrants a termination or employment separation, that's usually like my final straw, like, hey, I gave you these 3 opportunities to fix what you were breaking, you didn't, I'm going to terminate you. Before that, I generally do an administrative leave or suspension, especially with leadership if we do have problems with the supervisors. I tend to go through, and before separating employment with the problem, I will go through and do a really in-depth investigation while they're on that administrative leave or suspension, just so I have all details and everybody's protected and nothing is going to get out of hand if I do have to terminate anybody.
Daeus, do you ever use a PIP, a PIP?
Yeah. A personal improvement plan. Yeah, so actually I use them even for good merit and good progress. I'll use a kind of different version of a personal improvement plan, and I don't really have a name for it, but it's basically just stay on track plan, you're doing great. But I use them pretty heavily, even for small infractions, like, hey, this is a repetitive small infraction, you're 15 minutes late, you're texting me every day, I don't think it warrants any type of write-up or reprimands, but I have this 3-step personal improvement plan for you. Leave 5 minutes earlier than you usually do. When you get to the farm or get to the warehouse or wherever, you're clocked in, ready to work. You're not there dilly-dallying, and this is part of the action steps on your personal improvement plan. You have them sign it, you have a hard date to check in with them regularly, and then a final date to either terminate the personal improvement plan or continue it or turn it into a written warning or a termination. But I use them heavily. So you also you definitely want to keep records of everything. Like I said, even for verbal warnings, I'll write it up real fast, just a little blurb of what happened, time and date, and the employee. Sign it myself to make sure I was the one there. And if there's any other witnesses or a supervisor in the area, I'll have them sign it just for an extra layer of protection. I generally hold all records for the employees inside of their employee file until they're terminated or decide to move on. And then I move that to another filing cabinet and hold on to that record for 7 years. After that, I destroy them or throw them out, essentially. Just, stay factual, objective, and supportive. Go at it with a mentality of, this is a team you're building, this is your team, this is your entity. You have a vision for it, and if they're not able to fall in line with the vision that you have, as long as you're supportive, they'll generally 9 times out of 10 understand where you're coming from. No accusations. Don't say, well, I heard this from so-and-so that you did that to this other person. I wasn't there, but that's what I heard. You want to stay away from any conversations like that. You really want to have hard facts and reliable resources. If it's a he said, she said, just bring in the problem employee with the person that told you the problem and have them tell you directly while they're sitting in front of you. So it can get awkward and it can get kind of heated, but at that point you force them to stay factual and objective because they're in line with each other, like, okay, I guess they're calling me on my BS, I better start telling the truth. And generally it works really well for me.
What's more important, hiring or firing?
Oh, Oh man. Really depends on where you're at. I'd say for me right now, as it stands, as of today, hiring would be more important. I have the farm manager that I just promoted, got a better offer in Alaska and is now moving,
Ooh.
which is okay. He's been with us for 5 or 6 years now. He's been great, and I'm always happy to see people doing better. But that's the only reason I say hiring is more important right now, is I'm kind of on the hunt. I'd say generally though, you want to be as detail oriented when you're doing any terminations. Really just keep a hold of that documentation, keep a hold all the paper trails that you have from the W-4 all the way to the last final written warning that you have for them. It's an extra layer of protection, and like I said, it is at will employment, so the employer has a lot of rights and power against the employee, and it's a really slippery slope. The employer is really more protected than the employee in this state, is what I've found. So as long as you have a really good detailed record and paper trail, you'll be okay. But really, termination is generally what I focus on if I need to, over hiring.
Yeah, one second, Lyman. I think just in the last month when preparing for this workshop, I've started, like, my algorithm is feeding me like HR videos, which is interesting. But I just saw one this last week of Gary Vaynerchuk, if you're familiar with him. He's very adamant about firing. Well, hiring is guessing. Firing is knowing. You have no idea if the person you're hiring is going to work out. They're probably lying to you in their interview. If you're at the point where you're going to have to fire them, like, moving forward with that, and like moving on is what your organization needs.
Yeah, definitely. HR, the fun stuff. Recruitment, selection, training, and development, performance management, compensation and benefits, employee relations, compliance, and HR technology, and analytics. That is Pro Services mission statement.
No, that's actually an Google AI generated definition of HR.
Wow, that's cool. Pro Service. So this is who I utilize. They're based out of Oahu. They're a little pricey. I don't recommend them for just, if you're just starting out. I'd recommend going through somebody local like Altres or Employment Experts. But basically, Pro Service is all encompassing from payroll to counseling services. I can call them and do mediation for me between two employees if I don't want to do it. I mean, I generally do it myself, but it's an option. They provide all the workers' comp enrollment and TDI claims enrollment. They provide free trainings, so you can get your employees CPR, first aid trained for free, or while it's in the package. Forklift certified, OSHA certified, a bunch of different things. They're a really solid company. They're just on the pricier end. I think I'm paying about $26,000 a year in HR services for all of my employees and for them to do the HR for me.
So the point here is, HR is comprised of a lot of different components, and you as the business owner are responsible for all of them if you are hiring employees, along with the other 11 hats that you're wearing. So even if you're just starting to hire employees, you might not quite be ready for pro service, but you're gonna have to have some tools and some assistance with at least some of these components of HR. Otherwise, you'll just be drowning. So $26,000 a year sounds like a lot, but otherwise you're going to have to hire an internal Toby Flenderson for $60,000 a year, right? So exactly. You're actually saving. Mm-hmm. And it's nice. I worked at a place that utilized Pro Service as well, and I do kind of like the benefit of it being this independent, third party, neutral. Whereas, you know, if you're the one constantly doing all this stuff for the employees, you know, it can get a little increased conflict.
One thing that I've learned, just going through this whole iteration of life, is HR is so much easier when you pass it off. That's the first thing I passed off when I took over the farm. I did it for a year by myself, realized my time was spent managing and doing the HR. Probably 50, maybe 60% of my time was doing HR related paperwork. And I was probably paying myself close to $40,000 a year just to do HR, with also taking time away from the actual farming, tours, and chocolate production, and having to hire all these extra people to make up for one of the 11 hats that I was wearing. Ended up doubling my HR expenses. So like Anthony said, $26,000 seems like a lot. It is a lot. It hurts my wallet every time I think about it. But in light of where we are now, I was probably paying closer to $55,000, $60,000 just to maintain my own HR books. All right. There are other options. We utilized QuickBooks for a little while when I first started working at the farm. And this other company called Paychecks.com. They were good. They're cheap. They'll handle your payroll for you. They're not really an HR company though into it. So it's really just, you get your timesheet, you give it to them, they do all the math for you, pay your employees directly out of your bank account. They're not going to help with workers' comp, TDI, the FMLA Leave Act, any of that. Local staffing in Hilo, though, there's Altres, Employment Experts. To my understanding, they're both pretty good. I've utilized Altres in other manners rather than HR, but for like staffing solutions, and they're really easy to work with. You can also hire a CPA. Just know it's going to be a lot of money as well. But it is part of what they're trained to do and what they went to school for. All right, so to answer Lyman's earlier question, recognition and team building. So these are some of the things that I do or try to do and implement as best as possible to help with employee morale and retention. Employee recognition, try and go around and say good morning to every single employee just with intention, not just like, hey, good morning, and walk away. Like, hey, good morning, how are you doing? Do you need a hand with anything? I have an hour. And it generally helps with employee morale. Awards, spot bonuses, public praise. If we have like a monthly meeting, I'll generally highlight a fair amount of the employees and their actions or tasks that they got completed. At the end of every week, I require an end of week report from the managers, and I'll thank each of their team members and show the team members like, hey, this is what your manager said about you. You're doing great, I appreciate you. Just small gestures like that and just moving with intention and speaking with intention really helps keep the company morale up. Celebrating milestones, whether it's a work anniversary, a birthday, or a goal that was achieved. We'll do pizza parties, you know, all the generic stuff, hot dogs, hamburgers, pizzas, fruit stand, all that fun stuff. But then we also go out pretty big on our like potluck days. The employees will plan like a big farm day at the beach where everybody and their family gets together, and generally the farm will pay for half or all of the food and drinks and entertainment, and the employees just bring a dessert and some drinks and they have a good time. That's always fun. We also do like 4th of July watch parties from the farm, New Year's Eve watch parties from the farm, a lot of fun stuff like that. You know, utilize your space. I'm sure most of you guys running commercial kitchens have space to hang out in and make good food in. It's cheap, it's easy, it's fun. Some of the team building things that we've done, Pro Service offers some good team building courses where you build like a bridge out of popsicle sticks and marshmallows, and whoever wins gets a treat at the end. It's fun. Makes me feel like I'm back in elementary school and I get to rag on the rest of the team as an employee rather than their boss. So it's fun for me too. And workshops, like I said, I tend to do a lot of professional development courses for our employees, a lot of trainings, a lot of seminars, conferences, workshops. Send a lot of the managers to like different festivals and events around the island and on the mainland. So if you have the funds for it, I highly recommend doing it. Don't just send yourself, send them, because they're going to want to stay and work for you because they know that's an opportunity in the future. Volunteer events, group activities. We do a lot of holiday parties, or events I should say, for kids and families. So like Easter, we do a big Easter event every year, trunk or treating. We plan on doing Christmas events. And generally all the employees are on a volunteer basis, and it helps. It's kind of a bummer because you're working on a Sunday, but also it helps promote that bond and team effect that you are instilling on them. And at the end of it, we'll clean up and barbecue and have a couple of beers, you know, just enjoy ourselves and talk about the day. We'll do an impromptu, informal debrief on how it went. And it's just really helpful because it creates a comfortable environment for them to really share what their thoughts were throughout the day during the event. We do a lot of regular team lunches. Pretty much any time anybody has a birthday, I buy the farm lunch, and it's great. We'll play games like tell 2 truths and a lie, or like icebreaker games, something fun like that. Cornhole. We have a giant Jenga block mess thing. That's always fun. We don't really do too many virtual meetups because we're not, everybody's required to work physically on the farm because I need a lot of farm hands. So there's no virtual
Can't farm
meetups.
virtually.
Yeah, but I'm sure it's a good tool to have in the toolbox. And then benefits. I offer as many benefits as I possibly can. We do 401k matching. We match 50%. We do 5 paid holidays: Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, 4th of July, and Veterans Day, or Memorial Day. We also do medical, vision, dental. We have 2 free insurance programs that they can choose from between Kaiser and HMSA that they don't have to pay for, and it comes with medical and vision, but not dental or drug. And then there are just deeply discounted insurance plans that they can choose from where they pay less than 1% of their paycheck per month to the premium. And that I've noticed, we get a lot of good, well-intentioned new hires and potential new hires during the reviewing process. But that's why I have to do a lot of the pre-interviewing, because it also weeds out all the folks just looking for the benefits, just looking for a meal ticket. We also do spot bonuses. I generally give all of my managers a yearly bonus of just based off their metrics, how many goals they attained, their KPIs, how many metrics they hit and were able to achieve. And then I'll do a yearly bonus at a Christmas party of $100 cash to the employees. And if the employee really stood out for the year, at the start of the new year, I'll give them, it really depends, about $500 in bonuses. But I generally set aside about $6,000 a year in bonus money for the employees, and it all goes by the end of the year. And that really helps because it shows that you're willing to invest in them outside of their regular paycheck. It also helps, you know, really cement their understanding of your vision, because you're giving them that extra money when they know. I'm very apparent and open with our books and finances on the farm with our employees. They know when, like, we lost $30,000 this month, you guys need to work harder. Like, we're very open and transparent about it. So anytime they get a bonus, especially during a low month or a low year, it really boosts the morale and helps them feel warranted and wanted and needed. And I'm a really big proponent is it's not your money, it's our money as much as possible. Granted, I've never given myself a bonus, so I guess it's their money at this point.
Well, I mean, that brings up kind of a good point, Daeus, because I think for a lot of people listening, right, they may be considering, okay, I'm ready to hire my first employee, right? I need more help. My small business is growing, but I don't even pay myself yet. And now I'm supposed to start paying somebody else. What do I do? Help.
Yeah, like I said, everybody's different in their business mentality. I'm not in it for getting rich. I'm in agriculture. You're not in agriculture to make money. Pretty much all the money that we make goes either back into the company or into the employees' pockets. I know it's a bit of it's a tricky subject to talk about, definitely. But as a business owner, I believe your values should be in the business and the employees because they're part of the business. That means giving them as much money as possible for, merited, right? Merited money, not just here's $1,000, have fun at Walmart, but for what they do in productivity and on returns and in returns on investment. It does suck giving employees promotions and bonuses and pay raises when I haven't had a pay raise in 4 years, but it's okay. At the same time, I know we're getting through it, we're doing good things, and I really trust and value my employees. I have a joke that they do all the work and I just say yes or no. That's really all my job is like, yeah, sure, or no, we're not gonna do that, we don't have the funding. So I totally understand, like, you're not getting paid, but you gotta pay an employee. Just think of it in that frame of mind where they're a part of your company. This is like your second child or first child or third child. It's your baby essentially, and you want to take care of it. You want it to grow. You want it to be the standard of whatever industry you're in and hold profitability, but that starts with keeping people happy, mainly the people running your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, again, starting out, you can hire somebody and, maybe they're not doing exactly what you want for your business, or you're like, how come this person's not working as hard as me? And the reality is, it's ridiculous to expect anyone that works for you in your business to care as much as you do, because it's not theirs, right? They're doing a job. So that's something that I personally had to overcome early on in my own entrepreneurial career. I was like, wait, I'm frustrated because the employee's not working as hard as me. There's no amount of money you can pay somebody to get them to care about something as much as you do. So the fact that they care at all and they're showing up to work every day and putting in, sweat and hours for their job, which might be your dream, right? Your business, that's huge. So being able to show that recognition and appreciation, it goes a really long way. It's really important.
Awesome. So a couple of the resources that I've utilized in the past and still actually utilize currently, I've taken a lot of business prep and strategy courses and seminars from the SBDC, Hawaii Island SBDC, the Small Business Association, the federal cohort is really good on keeping you updated with legislation and policymakers, new bills and everything. They're really helpful. And the Veterans Business Outreach Center, they have a Boots to Business and a lot of good introductory programs for folks just getting into owning their own business and starting their own business, and I highly recommend going through there. Awesome. So, well, in conclusion, to me, what makes a good employee? Integrity, cohesion, and being dynamic. Those are the three qualities that I really look for in an employee. I know you can't find them during the interview process. It's really hard to find those diamonds in the rough, but give them 3 months, put them on a provisional period. If it works out, it works out. After 3 months, if it doesn't work out, let bygones be bygones and let them move on with their lives and you progress even further. Good work environment, cohesion, communication, and recognition. Just always being thankful, move with intent or intention, and never forget what you're doing and why you're doing it. Essentially your aura will leak into your employees as long as you're happy and healthy. Employee recognition, get them Costco cards. To recap, we went over quite a bit today. Necessary paperwork to onboard applicants and new hires, and reviewing or interviewing potential new hires, reviewing and counseling permanent employees and on the books employees, contracted employees versus W-2 employees, and resources. Yeah. Thank you guys. Thank you everybody. I appreciate Ho'ola and Anthony and Greenkind and Hawai'i Commercial Kitchens. Thank you.
Thanks, Daeus. All right, that's a wrap, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for participating in the chat. Thanks for coming in person. And thank you all employees and employers for all of your work. Mahalo.
Thank you guys.